All right. Thanks. Um, Lost train of thoughts. Oh no, if I'm working therapeutically, right? Or if I'm working with somebody that has chronic pain, or where there is a story, whether it's like real, physiological, or psychological, whatever, of limited mobility or flexibility, you start working on finding the baseline. The baseline is where you can move with relative comfort, right? Without pain or with as little pain as possible. And then you work on increasing that. You're increasing the window of tolerance, you're increasing the range of movement, right? So the way in which you sequence your classes or your practices and the kind of things that you're going to include is going to be different depending on your intention. Is one way better than the other? No, you just have different people and different ideas.
I have a question about movement. Don't start laughing every time I start speaking in English. I try, okay? um, do you think it's possible to explore movement really like in a mechanical way for a person that is not used to move his body or her body at all?
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't know that, you know, like there are like toes in your feet toes, capito.
Yes.
And then use them like to move, to really move the entire body, the thing that we were talking about earlier, because they don't know if they push they can really like have this thing that is this kind of reaction, full body reaction.
Yeah, I think that it's again, it's one way, right? And it depends. Often it depends on the people. Um, you could do that. You could start using just movement, which is what happens to a lot of people when you start getting into yoga classes. Or if you teach beginners, you often just kind of start to teach people movement and teach them what the body parts are called, you know, and show them how they might do shapes and things, right? And then you will go and start working into other directions, right? For some people, it works better the other way around, where they might need a little bit more of an explanation. They might need to know everything first, right? And those are the people maybe where you want to give them a little bit more of an explanation, and you want to make them feel things and imagine things first, right? And visualize things first, and then you have them move into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it depends a little bit on how people learn, right? But both are possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? I notice in my experience as a teacher that, especially when we're working with adults, well, actually with children too, but whatever, working with adults that don't have a lot of experience in embodied practices, starting with movement is helpful. But it really starts to make a difference if, as you are teaching movement, you can also have them think about stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because, like Saskia was saying, you can have people that can do all kinds of movement and have no awareness of what's happening, right? Whereas if you have them do movement and at the same time you can point out, well, what's happening, you know, in your big toe when you do this, and what's happening in your back, and what's happening, you know, can you feel what's happening in this part of the body? Like, how does it feel? Like, if you start to invite inquiry in people as you teach them movement, or as you have them stay in a pose, or have you as you have them breathe, or as you whatever it is that you're doing, if we can pair the inquiry with the movement itself, I think that that makes a bigger difference, or it might just kind of create more change faster.
Okay.
Right? Because then you're integrating top down and bottom up, which is two ways of like learning or affecting behavior. That's language that comes from psychology and psychotherapy, and it's kind of weird because whatever, it sounds hierarchical to me, but what it means is from the brain down. You can train yourself from the brain down or from the body up to the brain, right? Because the messaging goes both ways.
Yeah.
So you can change your patterns both by thinking about changing patterns and by practicing different patterns physically. If you can do both at the same time, you're just like cutting corners, right? Hopefully. Or getting more confused, I don't know.
Or we meet in the belly, where all the emotions are.
Or in the belly. My Zen teacher, some of you might have heard this already. My Zen teacher said he was teaching a meditation, and in Zen they always go to the belly, right? And they cultivate a soft belly. And he said it. He's really funny too. He's like all of the work that we do, all of the practice, all of the discipline, all of the things that we do is just so that we can be comfortable in our soft bellies. And it kind of made so much sense to me. And I don't know if it's true for everybody, but my belly tends to tense up pretty fast. I don't know if it's a woman thing. We've been taught to like tuck it in, like a dancer or whatever. I don't know. Maybe, right? There maybe is a component of that, but also like it's a vulnerable part of the body, right? So
Also, if you think about the feet, they are like in the ground. And if you think about the belly, is the emotion place. And if you think about the brain, is like the most logical and pragmatic part. So it's like
right.
meeting the
Yes and no. That's like it goes according to chakra theories and all of that. It's actually been created by Carl Jung. So it's whatever. It's a whole other conversation, that one, right? But it
sorry.
different qualities to different parts of the body. Emotions are also created in the brain. We might sense them. We might the feeling, the sensation of emotions might come into different parts of the body too. But emotions themselves are created in the brain. They're part of the process of making meaning of a sensation or of a stimulus. So things happen around us, right? Our body responds, our brain decides what emotion it is.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, that's a logical processing, right? Of taking information, and like the experience happens in the body largely.
Yeah.
So the main question to connect between, I think I need to put my plug my computer in, between Tuesday and today is, what do the muscles have to do in order for your body to be able to sense gravity? I'm gonna get my charger, you can think. Hi, Duman. Hi, neighbor. I'm open to interpretations whenever you're ready.
Something sort of profound happened for me in Sphinx when you were talking about thinking of the spine, because it's, there's a compression in the back of the spine, to actually be more aware of the front of the spine. And when I think about the front in terms of Sphinx, I always think of like more like shoulder and like heart opening, but I don't necessarily think about the front of the spine necessarily. So kind of having like more of a foundation for that, in like a grounding sense in a way, or like I guess just like more just thinking about it in a different way and like paying more attention to it. I started like to also notice, like, because I always hold tension in really unnecessary parts of my body, and with certain things. So I'm like, oh, I don't know why I'm like clenching my toes so much right now. So like when I can be more aware of it and maybe not be so tense, then I can kind of let gravity do more work when I'm not holding so much on my own. So yeah, I liked that you kept on bringing attention back to, I guess, our bones, because I think of that being so structural and very like supportive, and then like being more visual about it and actually like feeling, yeah, the points of contact and feeling that support than everything else, where I'm like, oh, why am I like tense in my forehead? Why am I tense in my fingertips or whatever? And then when I can let that go a little bit. I hate that term, letting go, but like when I can ease up, then gravity can do a little more work.
Does everybody agree with this? Anybody disagree with this statement? I mean, the front of the spine thing is beautiful, and I tend to agree also with that. It's an experience that I've had too. It's tricky to find it sometimes because it's a very, very deep structure. And that's where I feel like for me, having an understanding of anatomy and what things look like, it became very helpful because it was like, oh, that's where it is, right? That's what it looks like. Like if nothing else, like not everybody has to become an anatomy geek, but it can be helpful to just create a visual, representation of what we're talking about. But then the second part of like, what do your muscles have to do is one of the jobs of muscles is to resist gravity, right? In order to create movement or in order to support us as we move through the world in relationship to gravity, right? So in order to feel gravity and in order to feel our weight, muscles have to let go. Yeah? Would everybody agree with that? Why is that important in this context? I mean, in general, but in this context.
Is that probably they are always in this tense status?
Right? We often complain about our muscles being tense and our bodies being tight and all of those things. And one of the reasons why people get into stretching, one of the reasons why people might get into yin yoga as a form of stretching, right, is to release muscles. Because we have these chronic tensions, or what we perceive are chronic tensions, right, which are just patterns of holding, right? Yeah. So potentially a good way to release patterns of holding is, first of all, giving ourselves enough time to notice them, which is what Amalia was talking about too. It's like it takes a little while to figure out that your toes are still crunching, right? It's stuff that we don't necessarily notice quickly, right? And second, looking for gravity, because if you just tell muscles to let go, they don't necessarily do it. Again, if we all knew how to relax, we wouldn't have these problems, right? Muscles function better, some people say only, on action commands. So a muscle doesn't really, or the way in which the brain processes an information, like you command your muscle, you tell your muscle to engage, right? Because of what we said on Tuesday, we know muscles can engage in at least two directions, right? They can slide short and they can slide long. Both of them are engagement. Yeah? So engage is not necessarily enough of an information for the muscle to decide what to do. So what happens is that even as you consciously, or your yoga teacher might be telling you, engage your glutes, right? When you do bridge or whatever, right? Engage your glutes. What your brain is doing is figuring out what action you need to do, right? And sending that command to the muscles, which is extend your hips so that you can slide the muscles short. Because otherwise, engage could happen in either direction. So what we react to is actions, right? So when you are doing something like stretching or yin yoga, if you just keep telling yourself, relax, 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 it's often not enough. Some of us might be. For me, it's not, right? So finding something to do, even if it's something silly, like, can you give more weight into the ground? Can you yield into the ground? Right? That is an action that your brain will interpret. And the way that it needs to interpret it is, can those muscles let go so I can sense the weight?
And what could be the answer when, because you said relax, relax, relax doesn't work, of course. So what could we do?
Relax. If you yell at them to relax, it never works.
Yeah, of course. But what could you do?
You tell them something else, right?
Like let's stretch.
Find the weight. Can you feel the weight of your
Mhm.
arm? Can you feel the weight of your leg? Is there any place, is there anything you're holding up against from the ground, away from the ground, that you don't need to hold up right now? You can figure that out even as you're sitting, right? I was holding up my knee. Yeah. Is there, if you're trying to let things move down into the ground, is there anything that is pulling up? That's an action, right? It's things pulling up. And if your shoulders are pulling up, do you need them to pull up right now? If you need them to pull up right now because they're helpful to make you feel more comfortable, more safe, more I don't know what, great. If they're not helping, can you not pull them up? And in order to not pull your shoulders up, what you have to do is release those muscles. It's not going to be a 0 to 100, right? And holding patterns will come back. We also start to notice places like the toes or my glute, my right glute, out of control, right? Where it's, they'll just keep twitching around. Like, and you have to go back to them again and again and be like, can you just, chill? Yeah. And some will be more stubborn, but then you notice them a little bit more quickly. And then maybe it takes a little bit longer in between one tensing and the next. As the muscles release, part of the job that muscles have is to stop joints for going into movements or ranges that are unsafe, right? But we know from what we talked about this morning that unsafe sometimes just means unfamiliar, right? Because our anatomical and elastic range is usually a lot bigger than our active range. Yeah?
Yeah.
The way that works, last little bit of technical information, and then we'll break down the poses. I'll just share though. Zip. There. We talked about most of this. There's just a couple of names that I'm adding in, right? But it's a nervous system, right? The nervous system is a continuous whole network of nerve tissue that connects the spinal cord to all of the other tissues, or most of them. I think it's probably all of them. We just don't know yet. And it coordinates the body systems. You have your central nervous system, which is comprised of your brain and your spinal cord. And then you have your peripheral nervous system. This is where peripheral came from, not the skeleton, the nervous system, right? That is all of the nerves that come out of the spinal cord and go to the periphery of the body, and the cranial, some of the cranial nerves that don't go into the spinal cord, including the vagus nerve, which is your big abdominal one, right? It coordinates the nervous system, both voluntary and involuntary actions of the body. Voluntary actions are things like moving, right? Sensory motor, nerves. And then the involuntary stuff are all of the other things, like the involuntary contractions of the diaphragm when we breathe, which are actually partially controllable, but largely involuntary, or the contractions of the intestines as you digest and as you eliminate, or adjustments of the heartbeat, or all of those other things that we don't have direct control over. It's still mediated by the nervous system, right? In particular today, or in this training, we talk about the activity of the muscles, right? Or the muscles and bones, right? The parts of the nervous system that have something to do with our motor skills. Because our motor skills include not only moving the bones, right, around, but also creating the right amount of contraction or activity in the muscles to support either moving or not moving, right? There are a couple of special neuroreceptors or nervous system receptors that help us do that, right? One are the muscle spindles, which we talked about a little bit when we were talking about the muscles, or we just kind of like breezed through, right? Muscle spindles are neuroreceptors that are deeply in the belly of the muscles, and muscles have multiple, right? The different fascicles that we saw muscles or muscle fibers are comprised of, they have a bunch of different spindles, right? They provide afferent messages to the nervous system or to the central nervous system, right? So they are there to perceive when the muscle fibers are getting pulled too far or too taut. And when that happens, they send a signal to the central nervous system. Central nervous system sends a signal back to contract the muscle so it doesn't get pulled too far. Yeah, this is a case of you're trying to stretch your hamstrings, let's say, right? And at some point, your hamstrings will start to contract more and more as you try to take your forward fold or whatever kind of stretching you're doing. It's because your muscle spindles are reacting to a range of movement that they perceive as dangerous, right? There might be some nociception involved, so they become even painful. Sometimes not, though. Sometimes you just feel them getting tight, right? And it's because you're getting into a range that they're not used to. And so they'll signal to contract, right? So it's a protective pattern. And then there's the Golgi tendon organs. The Golgi tendon organs are located at the connection between tendons and muscles, which we saw briefly the other day is one of the weak points in the body, right? Everywhere where you have transitions in between tissues or in between different joints and so on and so forth, it can become a more fragile place. I don't know that I want to call it weak or fragile, but you know what I mean. So the Golgi tendon organs are right at the connection, and what they do is the opposite, right? When there is too much pulling, when the muscle is pulling too much on that tendon, they send a message to the brain to ask the muscles to release so they stop pulling on that tendon and to engage the antagonist muscle. Yeah, which is in some ways that release might be part of what you want when you're looking for deep stretching at end range, right? So if you're taking, let's say again, your forward fold, which we haven't done much, well, we did one, but we just talk about forward folds. The Golgi tendon organs, let's say, are at the attachment of the hamstring, right? Or close to the attachment of the hamstring, between the hamstring and the tendon that attaches to the sit bone, right? Close to your butt. And you go into your forward fold, and your spindles might signal to contract because you're going far into your forward fold. And as the muscles contract, they will pull more on the tendon, right? And the tendon doesn't really want to get pulled on very far because it's not elastic, right? So the Golgi tendon organ will hopefully send a signal to the muscle to release. And maybe even for your hip flexors and your quads to engage. Depends where you are in gravity and blah, 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 blah. So our range of motion, right, is mediated by these two messages that kind of tend to go back and forth. Belly of the muscle to contract, attachment of the tendon to release. Right? The spindles, while very, very effective at helping us, especially when you are moving or if there is load that you have to deal with, when you're doing passive stretching within your passive or elastic range of motion, might not be super, super helpful. Because as we saw, if you're contracting the muscles, you're kind of stopping them. If you're sliding the muscles short, right, you're stopping them from finding that long sliding. I just had an idea, but I don't know if it's true or not. I'm debating if I want to share it. I'll think about it. Questions? The not problem, but a thing to watch when we talk about the Golgi tendon organ and releasing the muscles is that the function of the Golgi tendon organs is to protect tendons from tears, right? And it is one of the argument of people that are against passive stretching. Oh God, sorry. Sorry, I always panic when I have like 400 phone calls and it's from number I don't know, so I don't know who it is. I'll figure it out later. Anyway, I should just. So the tendons are not meant to stretch, and the Golgi tendon organs are there at a place where that is particularly sensitive, right? And one of the arguments that people have against passive stretching is that you get to a place where you're overriding the messages of the Golgi tendon organs, right? And you're allowing muscles to pull, or you're allowing muscles to release to a point where it starts to affect that connective tissue, right? But at the same time, if your muscles are contracting and you keep pushing, if you are one of those people that pushes into stretching, then you're doing that anyway, and you're doing it because you're not releasing those muscles. So the back and forth happens, right? The contracting of muscles, of the bellies of the muscles that you're trying to stretch is usually a protective pattern, right? So it's there for a reason. And same as we were discussing with pain, right? It's like, well, how much of it is, you know, a useful protective pattern, and how much is it just getting into unfamiliar territory that your body just thinks it's dangerous, but it's not actually dangerous. And that answer to that I don't have. Because it depends on people, I think, right? And because yeah, it's another one. Like, honestly, I don't know. On the
Can I ask?
Please.
So, if you have students who, I don't know how to word it, their bodies just are not super mobile, and like I said, they don't have much sensation. How do you encourage them to find that, where it's like what's the difference between pain and just unfamiliarity?
I don't
like
know.
I worry about people hurting themselves, and so that's you know, like, I'm worried I'll tell them like explore this, but then they get hurt doing it.
What do you mean by they get hurt?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, they'll complain to me the next day, like, oh, I felt a pulled muscle here, you know?
What is a pulled muscle?
Yeah.
Like it's part of the tricky thing, right? That as people that are used to working with the body to some degree, right? Some of us more intensely than other, but Leanna is a dancer too. Janet is a dancer. You know what I mean? Like you're sore the day after.
Yeah.
That's largely probably just means that you, especially if you're doing active load bearing stuff, maybe you did a little bit too much of it, your sore is going to go away. If you're doing stretching, right, you might, what you call a pulled muscle might just be that like you went into unfamiliar territory and your body is reorganizing, right? If it doesn't last for longer than 2 days, right, it's highly unlikely that you have a pulled muscle if what a pulled muscle you think is a torn muscle or a damaged muscle. That's where the pain thing comes into play, where it's like pain is not a good indicator for damage, right? If you're doing something like Baddha Konasana, right, and nobody's pushing on you, if somebody gives you an adjustment and they push on you, high incidence of damage, right? As we all know. But if you're just there by yourself and you're not pushing like a maniac and you're trying to relax, right? The probability, unless there is previous damage that's already there and just was waiting to snap, which is a possibility, right? We don't know. But if that's not the case, the possibility of you actually getting hurt or meaning creating damage, it's quite low. If you're doing it 15 minutes or half an hour every day, twice a day, I'll be like, well, maybe more chance.
Yeah.
If you do it once in a while, I don't know. You know, don't quote me. Take it with a grain of salt. Go do your own research because I'm not sure. But my understanding at this point in my research and in my life is that it's fear. Right? It's a fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
Familiar. And it is a reorganization, right? You're doing something that is unfamiliar and weird, right? Your body has to reorganize around it to integrate it.
Yeah.
Right? I get sore at this point sometimes, and I don't even, in my mind, it doesn't count as pain, right? That stuff that to me, it's like, yeah, if I had to describe it, yeah, it's pain. Like if people come and like push on my muscles, it's pain, it's painful, right? But it's not, I don't classify it as pain if I think about pain as something that is related to damage, right? Or to an issue.
Okay.
Again, athletes, highly likely to also be bypassing pain signals. So again, take me with a grain of salt, right? Because my pain threshold and my pain tolerance might be higher than other people, and that might not necessarily be good on the long term. I don't know. I'll face the consequences. I've made my decisions. I made peace with my decisions, but I don't know what the consequences will be. I mean, at this point, I'm pushing 40 and I'm doing fine. So I'm kind of like, whatever. It's worked until now. Hopefully, we'll keep working. Right? And by the time I need a hip replacement, hopefully surgeries will be very advanced and very good. That's kind of like it's the way I'm thinking of it, you know, and it's the way a lot of dancers think of it. It's like, it makes me happy. It's interesting. It's my livelihood. If I need a hip replacement at some point, fuck it, I'll need a hip replacement. Right? But you weigh your chances, right? And it's the same thing. It's like, what are we talking about when people are like, I have a client like that too. And it's interesting because like I've been working with him for almost 2 years, and like we've seen a little bit of improvement. Mostly his hamstrings, his back line is really tight. He's very flexible, right? But his back line is really tight, like forward folds really hard. And I haven't figured out quite a way yet to really make consistent change. And that if you go back to on Tuesday, we were talking about stretching and changing range of motions through stretching and so on and so forth. And like, there are no studies that really prove that it makes a huge difference on the long term. And at this point, I guess where I'm at is that you need a little bit of a multi-pronged approach if what you're trying to work on is mobility. Resistance stretching, active range of motion, some of this neurological stuff that's like, can you feel support? Can you feel something else? Do you need those muscles to be engaged, right? But it means that it takes time and it takes a lot of consistency, right? Once a week, it's not going to make a big difference, which is the other thing that people expect too, right? They can't go once a week and they want to see results, and it's just not how it works.
Yeah.
Right?
90% of my students.
I know.
95.
Yeah, you give them the examples of learning how to play guitar. If you only go to your guitar class once a week and you don't practice during the week, are you going to improve? No, because from one week to the next, you probably forgot what you did. Same with languages. Same with yoga. I don't understand why people think that it's different, right? But that's what I tell people all the time. I'm like, I can give you all the tools you want, but you got to go do the work. If you don't go do the work, that's fine. You can keep paying me. But I don't know how much things are going to change. That's why I don't like doing private sessions, by the way. Because I'm always like, you don't fucking need me. Like, just do the work. But fine. If people want to pay me money, I'll take the money. Especially with pandemic and all of that. Right? Sometimes engaging, and I think that has to do a little bit with the Golgi tendon organ situation. Like, I work a lot on strengthening and engaging the front line, and that can help release the back line. Or you work on shortening the back line in this hamstring situation, hypothetical, let's say, so that they will want to release. Right? For me, it works better that way, right? Especially when I had my hamstring injury, I noticed if I did a lot of hamstring strengtheners, then I would usually have a little bit more range in stretching. But I don't think it works like that for everybody. But mostly for people like that, it's a question of like, well, do you think you hurt yourself? Because if you think you hurt yourself, you should go to a fucking doctor, because I'm not a doctor, right? If you think you hurt yourself, don't come back to yoga. Go to a doctor, right? If you don't think you hurt yourself, then what is this pain? What do you mean when you pull the muscle? I ask people. I get very antagonizing sometimes. So I'm like, what do you mean you pull the muscle? Did you tear it? Because if you torn it, go to a doctor. If you tore it, go to a doctor. You shouldn't be here. If it's uncomfortable, what are you expecting? Like, learning new things is uncomfortable. The people don't really like that answer usually, just FYI. Or they're like, it's none of my business, you have to go do the work. Yeah, they don't like that either.
I have a question. You mentioned strengthening the front line, the center, and I've like doing like release technique. It's like I have such like it's like took me a while. Like I didn't really like yoga for a while because of release technique, and it's just like loosen the belly so that like the bones and physics, you can experience that. Because when I do release the center, then everything is just like, oh, like in Sphinx, I'm just like let go of my belly, and then I like really am able to feel the structure of my bones and like be able to really like be imperceptible about it, like in my body.
Yeah.
So it's just like finding that balance, because obviously like it's good to, I have found it's definitely more beneficial to have core, but then also be able to let go of it. Just like finding that balance. I don't even know if I'm asking a question or But like, I guess like applying that to like for your students. You know what I'm saying? Am I talking in circles? Yeah. Okay.
Just a,
You know.
I think I know what you mean, and I think that I agree, because I don't do a ton of release technique, but I do a little bit of it, and I do Noguchi, and I do yoga, and I do ballet, and I do all of the things, right? And it's true, it is a little bit of a balance. And yoga has the peculiarity of doing a lot of isometric holds, which a lot of dancer movement techniques don't do, right? And you cannot, like, there's no way you can approach an isometric hold, especially if you're holding for more than 3 seconds, in the same way that you would approach moving and release technique, right? Because they're two different skills, right? So oftentimes when I do, let's say I'm doing Warrior 2 and I decide, because I'm a masochist, that I want to do it and hold it for as long as I can just to see what happens, which I do sometimes, right? I invite you to try it. It's highly unlikely that you're going to hurt yourself or damage yourself. You're probably going to hate it. You're going to hate me, and there's all kinds of shit that's going to happen. But, you know, probably not dangerous, right? But the thing that helped me the most is actually figuring out the pathways of weight there too. But also being able to save metabolic energy, to conserve metabolic energy, to only engage the muscles that I really need to use at that point. If I'm staying there in Warrior 2, I don't need my abdominals to be cranking. I just don't, right? If anything, if my belly's soft and my abdomen and my chest are soft, I can breathe a little bit more. I can calm my nervous system down. I can save my metabolic energy to use it for my quads and hamstrings. They're going to have to hard.
Sorry, I just got a emergency call. Sorry, I have to go. But thanks.
Right? Just to wrap up this whole situation, because as always, I'm late. I'm not late. The nociceptors we talked about, they are the pain receptors, right? And Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen says that the nervous system is a recording system of the body. It records our experiences and organizes them into patterns. It can then recall the experience and modify it by integrating it with patterns of other systems and other previous experiences. So it gets more and more complex as we grow and as we learn. It can initiate the learning of new experience through creativity and play. Very, very important factors. The nervous system underlies alertness, thought, and precision of coordination. When we were practicing today, and at some point I started telling you, pause where you are, visualize where you're going, visualize your transition, and then do it. That kind of brings in more of the conscious awareness into what the pattern of the nervous system would be to do that movement. And you can change your experience through creativity and play just by imagining things, which is fantastic. It establishes the perceptual base from which we view and interact with our internal and external worlds. Right? It is the fundamental creator and storage place for meaning, patterns, perception. It is a predictive system based on past experience. We've said this many, many times, right? It stores all of our experiences away so that we can predict what's going to happen, so that we can get there more efficiently instead of having to relearn it every time. That's why neurological diseases often bring up issues with sensory motor stuff too. And part of it might be nerve damage, and part of it might be that the information doesn't get stored away, right? So every time you have to do a movement or a thing, you have to relearn it because you're not retaining the information. Somatic memories are the embodied experience of past event as they are stored in the body, right? This is somatic memories is a term that comes from other methodologies and whatnot, but it is, I think, relevant because it's part of how we make meaning and how we interpret the sensations that we're having, right? Even if we have injured ourselves before doing a certain movement, right? That memory is going to stay there, and there is a high likelihood that that movement or that part of the body will stay very sensitive because there's a pattern of fear, right? Because we have a memory of that experience. Which is another funny thing about pain, is that if you think that a certain movement is going to give you pain, it will give you pain. 90%, right? If you reframe the experience so that instead of giving you pain, you're exploring sensations, so there can be a sense of curiosity and play and creativity with the sensation, with the experiences that you're having, then you start to reframe it so that what you're looking at is sensation rather than pain and fear. And this is a little bit of the top down part, right? The bottom up is do the poses, stay there, make them comfortable, right? Track sensations, see what happens. The top down is, can you reframe the way in which you approach the sensations that arise? And if you expect it to be painful, remember, it will be painful. Which means that there is a big role of memories and prediction in creating sensations and perception, which I think we have talked about plenty, right? And then the question about seeing yin yoga as a stretching modality. What do you mean by stretching? What do you mean by this practice? What are you trying to do? Is that enough information for the day? Liana ran away. I hope she's okay.
And now.
I have one more class to teach. We didn't go over the poses, but I invite you to do that on your own and see if there are any specific. I think we went over the complicated ones. And we talked about forward folds a little bit today when we were talking about the back line and all of that stuff.
We talk about banana pose. That's it.
We didn't talk about bananasana, which is my fave. But basically, it's that what I go to with that is actually more of a soft tissue stuff, which is what I'm interested in is a softening to lengthen on the long side and a softening to shorten.
Sometimes the response I get in that pose is, I can't feel anything.
Yeah, well, it's not a huge thing. You could go into side bend and see if anything happens, right? I doubt the people that say that are at their anatomical limit.
Yeah.
I highly doubt it. Right? But it's also, again, not meant to be one of those more intense poses.
Right.
It's pretty subtle. Right?
I think that relates to what you were saying, like people who can't feel as much sensation need more challenging poses. Yeah.
Need more challenging poses to get the sensation.
Right.
And then it would be great if they could also notice sensation when they're not doing anything. And it's an expectation thing too. If they're expecting to feel a big stretch, that's probably not what they're going to get.
Right.
But if you shift it again so that what we're looking for is other sensations and not just that stretching, maybe we start to also give people language about sensations, right? Other things other than just stretching. And I don't necessarily have a specific answer on that one either. You know, I think it is very individual. Like I have a million things that I can tell people to try and to notice and to think about, and questions and blah blah blah. And like, you know, some things will land, some things won't, right? Maybe you'll find something at some point, right? But the sensory repertoire, it's in some ways, it's like you can access it in a lot of different ways. Like stretching is one way, pressure is another way, contact is another way, internal movement is another way, temperature is another way. Like all of these things are sensations that people can notice. And I invite you, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but because we're going to talk a little bit more about the other more emotional and mental aspects of the practice next week, right? What does it feel like when you feel supported and held? And held is a word that I use with great deliberation, right? Supported and held are two different, very, very different qualities, potentially. I mean, they're not, right? You're holding something and you're supporting something, right? But for humans, to be supported and to be held can be very different in that meaning-making way, as we start to talk a little bit more about language, right?
That Margarita, it kind of reminds me, like for me personally, I'm trying to work on my extensions in dance. I've never had very good ones, and I always had it in my mind like, oh, like you're probably not flexible enough in order to do a good extension. And then I don't even know if these actually work, but I got one of those straps that you attach to your door and like anatomically I can do it, where I'm like, oh, okay. And like I guess maybe it probably doesn't do too much because it's probably more of just a strength thing with the extensions, and not necessarily because like if I can have my leg up here with support, then it's probably some sort of strength, like muscles.
It's
And
active versus passive range. You don't
right,
have neurological control to get there by yourself, but you have the
right. And I guess it wasn't even just like oh cool, like I guess I do have that like range of motion, like passively, but in some ways it kind of propels me because I got, I guess, a little bit of a confidence boost, or maybe because it like, I don't know. I think because it was just kind of like, oh neat, I didn't know my body could do that. And then probably like willing to explore more. So I don't know if that's in the conversation of like what happens when you do feel supported or when you do feel held. I guess maybe things can open up for you.
Yeah.
At least it did for me in that one silly thing.
Yeah, it's one of those things that like I really look into, again, especially with people that have pain or that complain about mobility a lot, and you put them into a passive position, you know, and you look at the range of motion, and it's like you have this range, like you have the range is there. What's not there is a control, right? But what does it feel like when you get to experience that position or that range? And then how do you just recreate it and take yourself back there, right? But you know that with support, you can get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you cultivate that support without the support?
Right.
That's a good question.
I know. I was going to say, I don't have an answer to that. Except somatic memories, right? So there's a way in which your body had that experience. And if you really, really pay attention to what it feels like to be in that position, I think, and maybe even in the process of getting there, even if you're getting there because like somebody's yanking your leg there, right? I think that maybe we can start to remember, right? When you're trying to do it actively, you start to remember. There is also, in terms of extension, when she talks about extension, it's like lifting your legs up, right? So there's also a factor of muscles. So like muscles will contract to a point and then they don't contract anymore. So your active range might never be the same as your passive range, especially in things like that for some people, because your muscles at some point will get in the way. They start to like bunch up. You can't go past that, right? But if somebody pushes your leg up, then you can't, because those muscles, like they're not bunching up, right, anymore. So there's also that. There's a lot of stuff, right? But I think that there is an in-between where we can work and start to figure out how to get there and what got us there. And how do you feel support when you don't have the support? You always have the support. You always have your skeleton and you always have the ground, even if you're doing aerial stuff, I will argue. The only time ever that I realized that I didn't have this same sense of grounding was when I started doing hook suspensions, because you can't push into it, right? You can yield, but you're not yielding into anything. When you do aerial stuff, you still have the silk, you still have the fabric that you can push into. So that was the only case I found so far in which is like sense of like founding support and groundedness was different. Probably people that work in water will have different experiences too. I don't do a lot of that, but I wonder, right? How do you find the support when you don't have it?
It's like a big metaphor.
Welcome to my life, yeah. Welcome to my brain.
Whole training is everything you're saying. I'm like, this can be, all of it can be applied to our emotional lives. You know, you're talking about the physical, but it all makes sense emotionally as well.
I know. Because it ain't different. And then there's the micro and the macro, like it's all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to probably on Sunday send you the recordings of these first 2 sessions and the notes from these first 2 sessions. I think I need to take tomorrow off and just like, you know, reorganize my brain.
Nap.
On Tuesday. Nap, do things like that, right? And I wake up at like 6 a.m. like in a panic, which is annoying. Anyway. So I'll see you again on Tuesday, but if you have any questions or things, as always, I'm here. Just shoot me an email or, you know, a message. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks.